You guys are great. Thanks for helping out. All right. Yeah, this happens every time. But I didn't want to record the first part anyway. Hi, everybody. What we're going to do is this, and that. And here we are on research paradigms. All right. So here's the deal. Um, Paradigms, you can Google it or you can chat GPT it, but really what a paradigm is, it's a whole worldview. It's a belief system. It is an all-encompassing kind of bubble that you live in. And everybody's got a bubble. This is one bubble, the post-positivist bubble. And what is positivism? That was when, with the development of the scientific method, we found that we could predict and control aspects of nature. You can't control nature, but you can predict and control aspects of nature. Um, and that was a very important discovery because the belief then was if you could discover all of these laws about how the world works, well, guess what? Then why don't we try to do this? Why don't we try to figure out how to predict and control human behavior? Yay! That's what post-positivism is about. It's after the positivist um, uh, positivist paradigm had expanded, so the bubble got a little bigger. And we have special words for aspects that are under a paradigm. In the post-paradigm, interpretivist paradigm, and critical theory paradigm, we have what's called ontology. There's epistemology. Everybody's familiar with methodology. And then there's axiology, which are values. And then generalizations. That speaks to, again, can you find laws that will predict and control human behavior? And every one of these paradigms has something to say about that. So back up here to ontology, that's your worldview. So this bubble, if you think about it as a self-contained universe, it's not infinite. It's got walls. There are walls up, and your worldview can only see within this spherical bubble. What counts as knowledge, epistemology, what counts as knowledge in this bubble is not the same as that bubble or that bubble. And the same with what counts as methodology and what true values are in these paradigms, etc. So in the post-positivist world, the world that is outside of our senses is what is the really real world. That wall is real. The um, attention that you have is real, but things that are not real are things like your emotions and things like your feelings and things that are not really countable, not really quantifiable. And this real outside world that exists is governed by laws of some kind. And if we can just figure out how to understand them and apply them, then we can make predictions and we can control behavior and so forth. Now, in order to do that, you have to be really reductive, meaning that if you're going to be looking at someone's attention span, well, you can't really get around and dig around in their head. That's not really allowed. So you have to find some object to observe, like when they were y'all familiar with Sesame Street or Sesame Street? So yeah, okay, good. So when the Children's Television Workshop was developing Sesame Street, they observed children and they watched their gaze, Gaze. They observed their gaze. And every time their attention went elsewhere, they noted it, and they got rid of characters that the kids wouldn't pay attention to. They got rid of, so that's how they did a scientific study on children's attention and whether or not what they were seeing was engaging or not. And you can go and look up Malcolm Gladwell. He's the one who um, noted that in his book, and I don't remember the name of the book, but you can wiki Google it and you'll figure it out. You're smart people. So that's what I mean by reductive. That gaze, that stare. Now, do we really know if the child's paying attention or not? when they're not looking at something. And give you an example, one of the characters that I loved as a child was named Harvey Knee Slapper. They got rid of him because the children didn't stare at the screen enough to keep Harvey around. All right. And now the poor guy is living on in LA on that street, can't find work. Anyway, was that fair? Doesn't matter. The science said get rid of them. The way that you work with a positivist paradigm is through deduction. You start with a hypothesis derived from a theory. That's why you need a theoretical framework. So what is the theoretical framework probably behind that Sesame Street example I gave you? Behaviorism. The child's gaze goes off when what they're seeing isn't rewarding. It goes off. So they want to keep it rewarding so they stay engaged. And then they can hopefully predict behaviors and begin to manipulate children into doing things like looking at an at and making the word cat and sat and rat and so forth. And that's done through a reward system. They get some kind of pleasure from watching this show. They stay engaged, and then they're supposed to learn the foundations of reading and behavior and whatever else. But that all comes from a behaviorist paradigm, linking stimulus response and um, positive reinforcement. And negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative reinforcement is where you take the reward away and see if the behavior continues. But it's all done because you believe that the outside world says laws that you can predict and control. You can reduce things to their observable, objective essence. You look at a theory, try to figure out how to observe something like attention span through gaze or whatever, and you then can deduce whether or not your hypothesis about whether or not the children stay engaged when X, Y, and Z happens or their gaze goes elsewhere. Um, the value in this sense means what's most important, what's the priority in this paradigm. And the priority is that you have to eliminate subjectivity. You can't have any kind of intervening variables coming in and disrupting your experiment or your observation. You can't simultaneously be making popcorn while the children are supposed to be watching Sesame Street and deciding if their attention span is held. You can't have children who may have been just almost involved in an accident on the bus on the way to the studio to go watch Sesame Street. Now your whole experiment is ruined because who's going to pay attention when that has happened? But if you meet all these criteria and you do so well, then you can generalize to larger groups and larger populations. And so the post-positivist paradigm is everything that is statistical, numerical, countable. So those of you who are going to be observing classrooms and comparing classrooms someday, or looking at districts or doing something else, then you have to stay within this positivist framework right here. You can't deviate. And when you read articles, you'll want to look at um, um, thank you guys in the chat. You guys are awesome. You're coming up with good stuff. You want to read articles to see if there was any violation in here. And what's the major violation with its subjectivity? And then you can begin to think about what are other violations. Well, if you're going to, generalize to a large group, look at the group that was in the study, and then look at your own school, look at your own classroom, look at your grade level or the grade levels. Does it look anything like what was in the study? If not, then how can you generalize to it? So the point of understanding these paradigms is just knowing where to look for the weaknesses. And look, we do the best we can with sociological research, okay? And educational research is under that umbrella. because you can't predict and control human behavior very well at all. So we do our best, which brings us over here to interpretivism. So while the post-positivists are quantitative group, that's really what I could put here instead. I could write quantitative right here. What our quantitative friends were doing, trying to observe all of these laws and everything else and generating research that way. Well, there was another group of people who didn't see any value in any of this at all because, as I said, it's really hard to predict and control human behavior. We do crazy stuff, and we're all here in the classroom, and every one of us comes to this classroom with a different set of issues and things that are going on in our lives. We bring all of this stuff to the table. And your experience of what the class that I'm giving is not going to be the same experience as someone else's. It might be similar, but it might not be the same for a whole host of other reasons that I'm not going to go into. Your world is in your head. That's what the interpretivists say. And when you bring your world in your head to a place with other people's worlds in their other heads, well, now we've got a whole other paradigm now. So you've got one quantitative paradigm here and its bubble, and you've got a qualitative paradigm here and its bubble. And what that paradigm says is, let's celebrate subjectivity. Since we can't predict and control human behavior very well, why don't we try to understand what makes people do what they do in context? So why does this group behave this way at this uh, in this district meeting? Why does this group behave this way in and so forth? We construct our world. How do we know things? We know it because when we work with other people and we interact with other people, whether you realize it or not, you're constructing a world together. That's what's happening. You're all like, let me give you an example. As this class progresses and we go on, we're going to develop insider jokes, for example. There'll be jokes or things that you all share that I'm not going to be aware of. You know, it might be, oh, he's wearing that same shirt again. And then you're going to be counting how many times that happens. There's going to be all kinds of things that are going to happen that are outside of my control, but a world that you're going to create and construct in this 250 that exists right now. When it's over, it's never going to exist again. It's going to disappear. When I get a new 250 in, new set of people, new set of bubbles, and we're going to construct yet another world. So what good is it? Well, what good is it is that if you use induction, meaning that you start with a hunch or you start with an idea, you start with a thought, and you think to yourself, how is that 250 constructed? And who is benefiting most from it? Who is not benefiting from it? And you try to understand how that grows organically. And by organically, I mean, you know, it's something that we all come together from our jobs or our world, and we're all sitting here on Zoom, and we're building these relationships, and it could be studied inductively to see what people's experiences are like through not a survey, that's over here, because surveys are quantitative. You're confining your participants to responses and Likert scale, reducing I like it to a scale of 5, 1 to 5. You know, that's over here. Here would be to sit down and have somebody talk to all of you and look at and then look at what you produce or you don't produce, or ask why you didn't produce it, or why, and you can build a whole theory out of that. The value is that it's acknowledged that objectivity is impossible. So why not use subjectivity as a tool and as a value? And you can generalize to that particular group, but it doesn't mean you can't learn stuff. Like I learned that maybe it would be better for me to do a whole thing for everybody first and then narrow that down to things that everybody needs to know, which is going to be critiquing literature, and then give the give one group like EDLP an assignment to do and have that will benefit them. And tonight it'll just be reading stuff. That's what your assignment's going to be. And then offer to my language and literacy folks the opportunity to spend time looking at how to construct chapter one and so forth. So there you go. That was that was very much an inductive experience for me. Is it going to work? How should I know? Which brings us to critical theory. The critical theory, which you're looking at, are power relations. Now, I want to pause for just a tiny second here. Um, in the post-positivist world, you derive your questions, your research questions are very tightly constructed and testable, okay? And they're derived from a theory that tells you what is and is not testable. And you're looking for reductive things that you can measure, like attention span or word count per minute, for example, or number of sight words read correctly for each minute using this method, whatever it happens to be. Interpretivist is just going in and understanding a situation from the inside, basically, and looking at it and building a theory out of it and themes out of it and so forth. Well, critical theory is looking at power relations, and it does come from a theory, much like positivism. So critical theory is already going in with some assumptions that interpretivists don't pure interpretivists wouldn't necessarily appreciate that because you go in with this notion that, yeah, there are going to be power imbalances inherently found in this context. Well, then it's like you're looking for problems and you're going to find them. And, that's the criticism. On the other hand, everyone, on the other hand, we know that there are imbalances in power relations anywhere. As much as I want to say that we're all equal here and it's just an egalitarian run class and everything else, ultimately, I'm responsible for what happens in here. Ultimately, I'm responsible not only for what happens here, but my job depends on how well things well now I'm tenured, so I could do we could just end now and I could go golfing. But I'm not going to do that to you. The the thing is that there's already an imbalance here. There is. I am, whether I like it or not, quote unquote, in charge. Not only am I in charge, but I also am, I don't know if you noticed, but I would identify my sex as male and my gender as male too. And that has a whole bunch of things that go along with it. Whether I want to, be this, like I said, this egalitarian, feminist, anti-racist uh, type of teacher, there still is going to be a set of experiences that I will bring to this table that many of you have had that I'll never experience, like having children or anything else, or being a person of color and being treated a particular way, or that no matter what context we're in, there's always going to be an imbalance. And so critical theory would say, yeah, interpretivist, you can go ahead and say you're growing your garden all you want on soil that's untainted, but everything's tainted or everything's colored in some way. You can't escape it. So what do? When you go into a context, you are going to be looking for how people interact. You're looking for who benefits. You're looking for how people benefit things. And this power, you understand, it's revealed through your investigation, through your study, through your research. I probably used this example already, but if you look at tenure, Tenure is a constructed concept. There was a time when it didn't exist. And tenure exists and it has different meanings to different people. So tenure for someone who already holds power of some kind, it's like a nice honorary thing to have. They could care less. It doesn't matter. Maybe if they don't get it, they'll sue the place and bankrupt it, but for them, it doesn't matter. For other people, tenure will mean that they have earned it. There's been an achievement. There have been publications, there have been good evaluations, there has been committee work. There have been all of these things. And when they get the tenure, they feel that it is a just reward. For other people, it might mean that this is the first secure job that they've ever had in their life. They grew up working class or working poor or simply poor. And getting this thing is not just an achievement. This is like the stranger, you're a stranger in a strange land now, all of a sudden. Now, if we extend that a little bit, and we think about now power relations, how do people get tenure where you are? Was it a fair process? Was it an unfair process? Did some people get it and other people didn't? And like if you are this person who earned your tenure because you did your 5 publications or however many, and you had these good evaluations because you taught the same class every year for 6 years, and you also are married but no children, and your spouse is also working, you have no financial worries whatsoever, and versus a person who is also trying to be a single parent with 3 children, and there is also a child with special needs and who is trying to maintain this job and is having difficulty getting things published, and they get almost published 6, but they not quite, and the evaluations are okay, but you know how it goes because they've got 7 different preps. They don't get the same classes and I think I don't need to go on elaborating. So in this critical theory world, looking for power relations goes in looking at contexts that are inherently imbalanced. It's all you can do is try to make things fairer for people. And the only way to do that is to see what's going on. And you do that inductively too. But again, your notion is that there is going to be some kind of imbalance. And what do you want? You want change, sometimes radical change. And there was an article that I'm not going to have you all read, but it was called Changing Women, and it was about trying to help homeless mothers not only get out of having no being unhoused, but also to try to find work and to enter into a program that would actually support them. And in in that article, yeah, there are things that people can do, but if you don't have a transit system for people so they can get around easily, none of this is worth anything. And they find also that it's very expensive to be poor, to be impoverished is really expensive. I could go on and on. I'm not going to, but they look at the context too of where things are. And I already talked about this already. Well, I didn't talk about this. You want radical change and you want it for similar groups, but you really want it for that group that you're working with. You are involved with them. You are standing outside and observing here, but here you are actually involved in what's going on. Which brings us to the pragmatic paradigm. Creswell uses some different terminology that's been updated, and I guess I will find the time to do that sometime. But it's really transformative that he would put as pragmatic and to be transformative. And in transformative research, this is like your mixed method research. that I'll talk about later, where you're trying to do both of these things at the same time. Because if you really want to understand something, then you've got to look at it from different perspectives, from the inside and the outside. And people lie and they don't do everything that they say they're going to do, or they're doing things that they don't even notice. And you can reveal that, and then you can do surveys to see what sentiments are. You could do other things that are quantitative to try to triangulate, to look at something from different perspectives to see if what you find is true. If you find it quantitatively and you find it qualitatively, and you've got enough what we call empirical evidence, that's tangible, touchable evidence, like what people say matches the receipts, which matches this and that, then you likely have found something that is reliably reasonable. And the idea here is you do try to generalize to larger groups, if possible, or at least similar groups. So there you go. That's all that stuff. And I think I must have gone over this already. This is out of Creswell's text. If not, just um, bear with me. The determination, that's to determine the laws that predict and control human behavior. You reduce things to variables that are testable. You use empirical objective observation and measurement, and that means collecting data like uh, the word count per minute, for example. And you're trying to verify the theory that you are drawing upon, behaviorist or otherwise. And constructivism is what I said. You're trying to understand the people in your study, and you have multiple participants with multiple interpretations of their own worlds. Social and historical construction impacts how people behave and how people behave in the workplace and stuff. And you're trying to generate a theory, and transformative and pragmatic. Well, transformative is critical theory. It's looking for power relations, and it is political, and it's collaborative, change oriented. Pragmatic, this is like for you to do a study on your own classroom or on your own district or your own whatever it is that you're doing, however large or small that unit of analysis is. It's action research. It's looking at what's happening where you are. Are there consequences of people's actions or inactions? Nobody's doing anything about blah 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 blah. Okay, well, there's your problem. And pluralistic, you can look at it from a positivist, constructivist, transformative point of view, and you're trying to affect real world practice. You're trying to do something practical. Pragmatic and practical, are similar. Um, and I talked about this already, the designs. I know I did that. Just briefly, experimental, quasi-experimental, or doing a longitudinal study objectively. And qualitative, I mentioned all of these things here. Telling somebody's story, phenomenology, how they experience something like tenure, for example. It's not going to be the same for anybody. Grounded theory, I'm going to walk you through that. Ethnography is a study of a group objectively. Case study, cold, objective, factual case study on an interesting subject. Mixed methods, I'm saving this. Convergent, explanatory, exploratory, and complex design. I'll explain that at another time. And just let me scroll through this really quick. Yeah, I did this already. This is where I started for what I recorded. Read that. Now, I handed you all this thing right here a while ago, and it's a handy little way for you to critique experimental studies, correlational studies, grounded theory studies, etc. So how do you critique quantitative survey research, for example, which one of the things I believe depends on survey research? And you click on it, and it tells you what to look for. What's the target population like? Higher quality, lower quality. What is the approach to collecting your people? How'd you recruit them? Did you give everybody $50? And over here, you have indications of lower quality. And so you can go right down the list of what are how is the survey used? The instrument, was it validated? Was it vetted? And you go down the whole thing, and you do the same thing for um, quality of a grounded theory study. You can use this matrix right here, my friends, to read any article, figure out which paradigm it falls in and which method it is, and investigate it this way. This tells you how to do it, which I can't do for you, but I can show you. So what I did is I applied that paradigm, that Creswell's paradigm, rather, and I did it to both of those articles. So you can read a really brief literature review example on the study of factors that influence teachers to become school administrators, so that if you were going to use an article like that in your literature review, here's what it looks like. This is, I wouldn't say a great example. I just say that it's an example. It's a passable example. When you read these things, then, anytime you're reading anything from now on, you should be reading it with a critical eye of how is this thing constructed? How was it built? What's the opening? So that if you have to do and write a literature review of your very own, which you're going to have to do, is look at the opening. Look at where they start. Here's the opening line, and I'll read it to you. Hancock, Black, and Bird, 2006, investigated the factors that motivate or inhibit teachers from pursuing administrative careers, asking what factors motivate or inhibit practicing teachers from seeking school administrative positions. You see that? You see that nice opening right there? Isn't it nice? It's nice. And notice something else. Start looking at how things are phrased. Here are the authors, and here is a quotation, double quotes, followed by the page number it's found on and a period. This is APA 7, everybody, right there. Start to look for how things are written and get used to it. Get away from MLA or anything else. This is APA land. And you can teach yourself APA just by looking at these things. If you open your mind and begin to see, look at how they open with who wrote it, what was the question, and what did they do? Cross-sectional survey of 357 master school administrator students across 11 universities in North Carolina, achieving a 329 response, 92%. That's amazing. Let me just mention something really quick. If you can get 27 people to respond, 27%, not 27 people, 27% response rate, you're actually thrilled. You're actually thrilled. That's why you really need to be critical. Read them critically. The instrument adapted from Harris et al. 2000 included 14 motivators and 17 inhibitors rated on a 4-point Likert scale. I'm going to pause right there, and I'll even highlight it. So look, they do have an instrument that they took and adapted for the study. You'd want to go and look at this Harris et al. Study to see how the validation was done. That's the first thing. The second thing that you'd want to do when you read this article is you want to see how they actually adapted this instrument. Did they just take a scissors and start snipping out questions and pasting it together and sending it out? You can't do that, because you violate the integrity of the questions that are measuring certain variables, larger variables. So you'd want to see how they did it if you wanted to do a real harsh, a real thorough critique of this. The other thing that you would want to do is look at this 4-point Likert scale. That's a really tight scale. That's a very tight scale. You know, love it, like it, dislike it, loathe it. That's 4. There's not a lot of distance between those things. You'd want to see what kind of statistics that they run on this. Because if they're doing high level quantitative statistics on a 4-point scale, it's problematic. It's problematic. They would have to do weaker assessments like what's called a chi-square. I'll talk about that when we're looking at quantitative analyses. Now look at this, using exploratory factor analysis with principal components extraction and varimax rotation, research identified 4 motivator dimensions. And let me pause there. You see all of this language here that some of you might know this and work with it every day. I don't know. I haven't asked. But others might be going, varimax rotation, who's he? The whole point of this is go look it up. Go look it up in ChatGPT, for example. I'm not afraid to use that thing at all. I use it for specific purposes like that. And then you know what I do? I then go and validate. I go and validate what it says. I don't know if I told you this. I smashed my face up in Minnesota when I was riding my bike and I wanted to sue the place that screwed it up when they put the wheel on. So I went to ChatGPT and tried to find cases, and I found one that was exactly like mine. And then I went and looked it up in law books. It didn't exist. It wasn't there. And then I discovered that ChatGPT can lie to you, and you got to be really careful with this thing. But to go back to this, you can go and learn about it. And you can ask it to explain it to you in simpler terms or more complex, whatever. And stop talking. Okay. Personal. So these are the motivator dimensions: personal professional benefit, altruism, challenge, leadership, and influence, and 3 inhibitors that push people away from wanting to be an administrator: increased risk, insufficient gain, and personal needs and issues. Among these, altruism, such as desire to make a difference, emerged as a central motivator, while bureaucratic paperwork and standardized testing pressures were among the most frequently cited deterrents. Do you see how well constructed that little paragraph is? What a nice summary it is. It takes us from the question to the people, to the method, to the variables, to the findings. Done. All in one little paragraph. Now, there's no criticism in here, but it does pretty much sum up what was done. Now, here are things when you apply Creswell's rubric. You can see things that may be adequately described but limited generalizability because it's probably only a state school populations. It's a non-probability sample. You got basically whoever responded to the survey. You're kind of at their mercy. That's weak for external validity, very large sample size, but this is no justification. Like, how'd they get so many people to answer that thing? That's an incredible number and an incredible response rate. The instrument was adapted and items disclosed, but what I told you, we would have to look to see how, in fact, they cut up that survey. Maybe they just used a shortened version of it that was validated, because there are short versions too, sometimes. What's the validity and reliability? Well, 4-point scale, it's not, usually if you want to try to attempt to do something with the rubrics or 4-point scales often, and so are surveys, and those are weak statistics are born from those. If you want to try to fake something, you usually go on a 9-point scale or a 7-point scale, because that gives you more dimension. And that is how you fake decimals on Likert scales. Have you ever had those things where you're sliding something? Well, that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to give you some decimals and so forth. But this thing, not so much. No detail on the procedures or IRB reported very strong response rate. Anyway, you can go through and look through the rest of this. Here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses. So if this were a study that you wanted to include to support your research question and your direction, then maybe you would want to incorporate more information about it, like you see here. But if it's just one that is telling the reader maybe what we already know about something, then this would be fine. You wouldn't need to go into that great a detail. But I'll step back for a moment, and I want to encourage all of you to go and read the study. It's right in the folder on our friend Canvas. Read it. You can skim it, and then look at this and see how it's done. When you're my friends in EDLP, you are at the point where you're trying to build a literature review, a repository of literature, and a repository of literature that's going to eventually lead you to a question, unless you've been assigned one already at your workplace, whatever, I don't know. But start writing these things, get in the habit and develop your own style of writing, and do that now. Don't wait around. So let me bring you to this page here. Here is an APA 7 manner of citing literature. Here are three authors. Last name, and I'm going to do this. Last name, comma, space, capital D, first, period, space, capital R, middle, space, and you can just start using my Minnesota monotone in your own head as you read these things so that you can see how to put together APA 7. Capital A, everything else is lowercase unless it's a proper noun or follows a colon. Italicize the name of the journal and the volume number, not the issue number, and the page numbers. There you go. Done. Great. If you will all just look at your the books that you are asked to purchase and go to the bibliography, it's most likely APA. You don't even need to look the stuff up, and you can try to put it into those citation builders, and they're all wrong. They never work because they're proprietary. The APA 7 is proprietary, thank goodness. ChatGPT stole all of it. So you probably can put the citations into ChatGPT and you'll get a pretty good. Okay, never mind. So here's the other article. This is a qualitative article. Whatever you want to call it, Science of Reading Mythologies in the Education Reform Movement. And here we go. So let's say this is one that you really wanted to include because it's an important one for your research question. And here is how to introduce it. I don't have any idea how to pronounce that person's name, so I'm just going to say I. 2023, examined how the science of reading, SOR, was constructed and mobilized in Tennessee's early literacy reform debates. Her central research question asked how SOR became conceptualized in policy deliberations and what interactions between advocates, legislators. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but this is a longer inclusion because it's more important to whatever this person happened to be writing. It says here, I will do this. To investigate these questions, these are qualitative questions, I employed an anthropology of policy framework informed by Bartha's mythologies, drawing on 30 legislative recordings, multiple bill drafts, advocacy reports, media coverage, and 8 interviews with policy actors. Data were coded using descriptive, in vivo, and thematic approaches, allowing for a nuanced analysis of both discourse and policy practice. So I deliberately picked this because some of you are not going to be doing quantitative research on people or even qualitative research on people. You're going to be looking at documents. And this is an example right here, if you want to read the article, of how you can do an analysis of curricula or books or people's of memos that have been written or whatever it is. This has got a method for you to carry out right here. And that's another thing that I want to tell you is, when you're reading your articles in your classes and you're reading them over, and usually you'll read the questions, skip over and go to the findings and the recommendations, and you're done. Don't do that anymore. Start reading the questions, start looking at what was collected, how it was analyzed, and ask yourself, can I do this? Because you might be able to repeat in what someone else has done. And this is doable, my friends. If you're doing a project, you have to explain how you're going to wade through and ferret out what you're keeping and what you're letting go in your creation of whatever it is you're creating. And maybe this is what you're going to do right here, something similar to this. The findings revealed that SOAR operated simultaneously as an empty and full signifier. As an empty signifier, it was used interchangeably with terms like phonics-based instruction, structured literacy, or multisensory instruction. As a full signifier, it invoked authority of science, though often reduced to vague claims about the brain or simplistic phonics-based. I'm not going to go on, but you can see how you can do qualitative research using documents and recordings and transcripts and blah, 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 right? Because she grew these terms, or these terms came from her study and were filled. These were buckets that she filled with examples of what empty signifiers and whatever the other one was, I'm sorry, likely drawing from the framework that she used and other sources that she used. And you can read the rest of what she says in here. But this is what you would use if you're going to do a similar kind of study. And then I have right here the application of this framework, going down the list: problem, theoretical orientation, positionality, data collection, ethics, blah, 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 blah. You can see how how you might use something like this, like on an Excel sheet, and just type it in as you're going along, or whatever else you want to use. And then looking for strengths and weaknesses that are common and attendant to qualitative research. I mean, the first thing that would come off the top, obviously, is this: she's got a position. She has a position already. Then she reads this, she is putting these things into these buckets, and it's more critical theory in many ways, because the buckets might already be there, and she's already filling the buckets with examples. But again, we do the best that we can. We do the best that we can. The only thing that you can really do with a study like this is decide if the person was fair. Did the person give a fair treatment to the material and the subject matter that they were reading? And this is a shorter example right here. If you were just doing kind of a throwaway, not a throwaway, but just a summary of here's what we know. And there you go. All right. My friends, my mom is still asleep, and I should stop recording right here. Let me stop recording. That's going to be a weird one, and I'm going to pause that. All right. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Blah, 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 blah. So there are two documents in that folder that is on Canvas, and one contains a thesis that one of our students found, and it's called an analysis of vocabulary practices in a Title I school. And it's from 2014, but that doesn't matter. It will give us an idea of what language and literacy and particularly one um, advisor is likes to see in terms of a constructed thesis. And so everything that you're seeing in here is typical thesis fare. So just get in your minds that you're going to be having a title page, and it's going to look like this. You will have a second page that will have just like this, and another page with the title, just like this, and the approval page, just like this, with Roman numerals. Remember those from a long time ago? And this here is a sign-off sheet for the graduate coordinator right here. And here is the abstract. And typically your abstracts are written at the end, after you're done. And that's fine, but you can see the way that this abstract is written. Statement of the problem, and here's what the statement of the problem is. Now, the statement of the problem in your chapter 1 contains your research question, your overarching research question. And then there might be sub-research questions or hypotheses that you're testing or something of that nature. But that's what we call the statement of the problem. Now, if you're doing a project, the same kind of language is fine, but just remember that the problem in this case might not be something wrong. It might be simply an issue. So you might be saying, writing something like current issue. You can look at projects and see how other people have handled that, but it's roughly the same thing. You're going to state what you're going to do. Either you're researching a problem, blah, blah. Okay, vocabulary knowledge. Let me start again. Let me see if I can get a kind of, do they offer a triangle? They don't offer a triangle in here. They got everything other than a triangle. Well, I guess I can draw one. But I want you to understand that the way that these things being like the statement of the problem or anything, your whole thesis is built around your problem statement, your research question. That's what the whole thing is built around, and I'm going to emphasize that. But it starts from like a general and becomes more and more focused until it gets to the point. See, that's how I think about these things sometimes. I try to think about what's not too broad, but what's the overarch, what's the drill down, and what is the nail down. All right. And so in this instance, vocabulary knowledge plays a critical role in reading comprehension and student success, but many students start their school careers without adequate vocabulary knowledge. That's broad, right? That's a broad statement. Narrow it down. Schools can play an important role in building student vocabularies, but current primary school instruction is not making a significant impact on vocabulary growth. It's not about a grocery store. It's not about an after-school activity on the playground. No, this is narrowing it down. So in general, now we're getting narrower. So here's school and primary school, and we have a problem. There's no significant impact so far. Your literature review better address that, okay? Your literature review better address this, if that's what you're going to say. We better see that in print. Here is the nail down. So breadth, drilling down, the purpose of this study. You should just use that as your statement. The purpose of the study is to analyze the vocabulary practices in kindergarten through third grade classrooms in a Title I public school to determine the level of systemization and the extent that current practices align with research. My friends, this gives us everything in one paragraph about what this person is going to do. And it is like an elevator speech that if somebody asked you, hey, you're paying all that money at the graduate school over there at the Sacramento State. Well, what you doing? This right here is a concise statement that even if you took away all of the preceding stuff and just stuck with this, the purpose of the study, if this is all you said right there, that's a whole world right there. That says everything you'd need to know and everything someone else would need to know about what it is you're doing. You got to get that good. That's how good it's got to be. And that's why working with your advisor and thinking about this stuff yourself, think about how can I get it down to no more than I don't know how many words are highlighted in here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 90 words, under 90 words. Well, there's probably about 35 words here. Under 35 words. I think it's really good. And here is sources data. Data was gathered, I would have said or gathered, I'm old school, gathered through open-ended interviews with a sampling of kindergarten through third grade teachers. We know who is being interviewed. Interviews also included district coach assigned to the school and the school principal. Additionally, classroom observations were conducted. And I won't read the whole thing to you because all of you can do that, but I think that this is a nice example. I would have probably shortened it. I would have made it more compact for an abstract, but that's just me. That's just me. There's no hard and fast rules on that, but as far as I know. Next thing you want to look at the introduction, look at the table of contents, all right, and see how it is constructed and look at how it's laid out. This is how you're going to do it. And they have a template for this. And you're going to use the template. You're not going to be typing dots. Don't be typing dots. You're going to just use the template, all right? And if you need help with that, I can help you with it. But there are other people who can help you too. There are plenty of other people. Look, this was done in 2014, for goodness sakes. Primary research questions, the rationale, the methodology, the definition of terms, limitations and delimitations of the research, and the organization of the thesis. And it's done in 9 pages. You're not writing the great Sacramento State novel here. This is a thesis. You're confined. I don't see a theoretical framework in here or a conceptual framework. Perhaps we'll find it in the rationale, or it'll be hiding in the research questions, or maybe it was just omitted because it was deemed to be unnecessary. These are things you negotiate with your chair. You talk about these things. Look at the review of the literature. Increasing knowledge through read alouds, considerations for direct and explicit instruction, incidental learning of vocabulary through independent reading, and considerations for word selection. Now, as I told you, if it were, and I'm not criticizing this, please understand that because everybody's got a different way of doing things, okay? If it were me, I certainly would want to see some kind of support for the contentions that are made in here because I'd want to make sure that there's actual evidence to back it up. And it may be there. We'll need to read the thesis in order to find it, but we're only going to look at chapter 1. Kidoki. Moving down here. So the review of the literature, you'll want to think about your own review of the literature. And I want to emphasize this, and I can't emphasize it enough. And I'm going to do something here that hopefully will be helpful to you. I'm going to open both of these both documents, and I'm going to go over here to where it says menu way at the top. I'll click on menu and I'll go to window, and then I'm going to go to tile, and I'll tile it vertically. And that way you can see both documents side by side. And another thing that's really, really helpful is down here on this button, I think I can do read mode. And I'll do that so I get more real estate out of it. And I'll go over here on this one and I'll do the same thing and I'll go to read mode. Now, one thing that I did on this document here is I went paragraph by paragraph and I discussed, well, I'll show you. I went paragraph by paragraph and I present to you what the structure of it is, what the function of it is, meaning what is it addressing, the problem, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. Um, the evidence, the contentions, and some suggestions that maybe would have been useful in something like this. And please remember, it's always hindsight's always 2020. Just because I make suggestions doesn't mean that they're any good. All right. So let's just not go bananas here. But here, I want to also show you something that is extremely important. And that is all of you, oh, for crying out loud, let me scroll that down. All of you need to have a clear and concisely written statement of the problem. And you should print it out and you should tape it to your mirror in your bathroom and on the refrigerator and on your computer. Anywhere you look, put it on the ceiling, on the floor when you're tying your shoes, because every single thing that you include in your thesis is all about this, especially right here. The purpose of this study is to analyze the vocabulary practices in kindergarten through third grade classrooms in a Title I public school to determine the level of systemization and the extent that current practices align with research. So no wonder why the literature review is constructed as it is, because it's all about this. As I said, I would have had a little section on this stuff right here, but I'm not the chair. And the chair determined that that wasn't necessary. What was necessary was this, and the chair rules. It's a strong chair thing. So if you look then at where it says problem right here and the empirical work and all the other stuff, this again is all about and relates to, and why I'm going to keep saying this over and over again is have your statement of the problem not only memorized, but right in front of you as you're doing this. And everything that you write and everything that you think and every article that you choose and every critique that you write has got to be related to and supporting and elaborating on and contextualizing and serving this. Well, I hope we're all on the same page with that. You're not going to be writing on the history of kindergarten vocabulary practices. No, you're on this thing right here. This is what you're doing right there. The faster you can do that, the easier it is going to be, the easier your experience is going to be with your research. So what I recommend then is that you go through, and if you set it up this way, and you go ahead and you read this thesis, and you do so by looking at this. Oh, sorry, that's the abstract. Sorry. Here we are. Start with the introduction and then read this. Read through this and read through the second paragraph right here. And I went through and I just tried to provide you with an analysis of what this thing is doing. Because when you get your model thesis, the one that you're going to hopefully use and hopefully follow, that is how you should read the thing. You shouldn't just read it for information. You should be reading it for how in the heck is this thing constructed and put together? What is it that was done in service of that statement of the problem? Have I not been sharing my screen? I hope that I am. Good. It says I am. Thank goodness. I almost just had a heart attack right here in front of everybody. Um, now let me tell you what I'm going to do next. Oops, 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 oops. Don't do that. Dr. Boosalis, just come on. You can do this. You can push the stop sharing button. I know you can do it. Oh, maybe I already did. Oh, good. Um, ugh, God, we're having technical difficulties again. Don't want to share. I want to close that. Okay. And I want to open this like that. This is what I want to do, everybody. I'm going to go through and record chapter 1, and I'm going to talk about it. And then I'm going to post it for you. And so what do I want you to do? I want you to go and read it and read the critique. And then you can watch the video tomorrow when I post it. I'll record it between today and tomorrow at some point. And that's what I would like us to do. And so I'm going to stop recording right there.